Good morning, all. Welcome to the second annual Conversations with Veterans program here in Novato, which is an opportunity to not only honor our vets, but engage with them. I would like to remind people that on Veterans Day, this Monday at 9:30, there'll be ceremonies down at the Veterans Memorial Auditorium starting at 9:30. So I would encourage everyone to participate in that. It's a great event. Participating today will be first Novato Mayor Eric Lucan, Sylvia Barry of the Rotary Club of Novato Sunrise, whose brainchild last year was this event. And then our panelists today include, first to my right, World War II Navy veteran and Novato resident, Don Andresen. Yeah. To my left, World War II Navy veteran and Novato resident also, Army veteran and Novato resident Dick Locke, also a member of the VFW. And then to my far right, West Point graduates and Iraq War veterans and now residents in San Rafael, Corey and Adrian Shirk. So please welcome them to Novato. And then finally, to my left, a Blue Star dad who lives here in Novato, Christian Thwaites, and also a member of the Rotary Club here that's co-sponsoring this. I want to thank both the mayor and the city of Novato and also Rotary Club of Novato Sunrise for supporting and co-hosting this event, which we hope will be an annual event here in Novato, and which we hope to really export to other communities, because this is easily duplicated, and I think something that every community should engage in. I want to also thank Novato Community Television for recording this event as they did last year. And last year they posted it on YouTube, and I know they will again this year. So we'll get that link around, because again, I think it's an opportunity to export this concept in the engagement that was really so special last year, and that we hope will be another opportunity this year. We're going to begin with a posting of the colors by the Novato High School Air Force JROTC Cadet Color Guard. So please stand.
Color Guard. Halt. Face. Present colors.
And I'm going to ask Harry Thomas, Army veteran and Rotary Club member, to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Veterans and active duty, please salute. Others, please place your hand over your heart. And in honor of our veterans, deceased, active, and retired, please repeat after me. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you.
Order. Colors. Right. Face. Forward. Arch.
Thank you, Color Guard. Just by way of background, for those of you who don't know the origin of the color guard, back in days of of battles long ago when there wasn't the communication that we have today, the flag represented the rallying point for a regiment, and protection of that flag was critical. So only the best soldiers in a unit were designated to protect the colors. Today, individuals serving in color guard must be of good reputation, having integrity, ethical conduct, and exhibiting standards which merit respect. The JROTC program in Novato High School is an exemplary one and allows young students to learn about leadership and delegation, discipline, etc. So I commend both the high school and the leaders of that program for the strength of it and the importance and benefit that it has for our youth. What I'd like to do is turn this over first to the mayor for some comments, and we are going to be handing mics around because we have to get compatibility with the overhead as well as the TV recording. So, Mr. Mayor, would you kindly step to the front?
Good morning, everybody. I want to, at first off, just start and welcome you to our historic City Hall right here in Novato on behalf of the entire city and the City Council. It's a tremendous honor, a tremendous privilege to be able to host this event here. I'm actually going to slide over here because I feel like I'm standing right in front of the panel. But we're so excited to be able to have you all here this morning. First off, I want to especially thank Gil and Sylvia for putting this whole event together this second year. Let's give them a hand for bringing us all together this morning. I also want to introduce a couple guests that are here with us this morning. I saw our district attorney, Lori Fergoli. Where is Lori? Right there. Thank you for being here. We also have council member-elect Amy Peel from District 5. I also spotted our former mayor, Jean McLaney, sitting right next to her. And some of our great officers in the back. We have Acting Chief McCaffrey and Lieutenant Howard. So I just very briefly, when I look back at my own life, my life was impacted very, very deeply and very profoundly by a veteran, and that was my grandfather. My grandfather served in World War II. He was in the Pacific for about 4 years. And the one thing that so impacted my life is every time my grandfather would talk about his time in the Navy, he was a second-class petty officer on the USS Seebeck, an attack oiler. Every time he would talk about or refer to his time in the Navy, he never said, my time in the Navy, or my time in the military, or my time in the armed forces. He always referred to it as his time in the service. And that's what it was to him. It was service. It was service to his country. It was service to his fellow man, to his family. And it impacted him in a way where he was the most selfless individual I had ever met. And it impacted me growing up to see this individual. And in many ways, I think it prompted me to get involved in service myself here in the city of Novato. So when we look at veterans, the impacts that they have in our lives, I did not have to serve, but my life has been impacted because of it. And our greater Novato community continues to be impacted by veterans that we have in our community. And I wanted to just thank you for the importance that the veterans play in our community. We have a very great community here in Novato. I'm honored that we're able to recognize our veterans through our street banners, through events like this, through our 4th of July parade and events that we have throughout the year. And I just want to say a heartfelt thank you for your service on behalf of the city of Novato, for all that you have done and continue to do to make our community a better place. So thank you for being here, and I'm going to turn it back to the panel.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Maybe you could hand the mic to Sylvia Berry. Sylvia, as I said, originated this idea last year when she came to me and suggested the concept of a community event embracing veterans, but also allowing them to talk about their service and engaging with civilians. And I just thought it was a brilliant idea. So she was then president of the Sunrise Club of Novato and retains active engagement in so many different service areas here in the city. So let me turn it over to Sylvia to make a couple of comments.
Thank you, Gil, and thank you, Mayor Lucan, for the introduction and congratulations. Welcome, everybody, and thank you for attending the second annual Conversation with Veterans event. And I also want to thank our district governor, Sue Rocco, and her husband, Alan Hess. Alan is a veteran, Navy veteran as well, for her support of the event. And please, Novato Sunrise Rotary President Mike Ring. Thank you for coming. A couple advertisement. City of Novato has a Novato Proud program, and you see that we have veterans picture up on the Great Avenue. So there's a postcard. If you haven't had your picture taken, please take the card and contact the number over there. And we also have a salute for Rotary that talks about the 3 Novato Rotary clubs, what we do and whatnot, so you can pick up on the way out. Talk a little bit about myself. I grew up in Taiwan, and I came to the United States to come for my graduate school. I adopted United States as my country, and I'm a citizen of the United States. Through the years, I have learned about the freedom people have in the United States and how precious it is to have the right to vote, to voice our opinions. Our privilege to vote is made possible by the sacrifices our veterans, our soldiers, and their families made. After learning we had more than a dozen veterans in Sunrise Rotary, I thought it would be amazing to do a project for veterans, especially when we're City of Novato, because Novato has a rich military history with Hamilton Air Base here. So I want to thank City of Novato for embracing this idea and help us promote and put on this event every year, hopefully to see you next year at the same time. As our flyer points out, we often tell our veterans or people who are in uniform, thank you for your service, but really don't make any effort to understand what their service has been or what it meant to them. We believe the best way to honor our veterans is provide them with the opportunity to tell us about their experiences, their stories, and help us learn how to talk to them. We also like to encourage all members of the community to give service themselves. Bill Sambo will be moderate our session today. Although Gil didn't serve in the military, Gil was appointed a civilian aide to the Secretary of the Army for Northern California. It's because of his service in organizing his community in Connecticut to support a U.S. Army brigade based in Europe and their families through 3 combat deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan. Gil's passion to support those in uniform, which extends to first responders, began after he witnessed the attack on the World Trade Center from the next building. That's where he worked. And the sacrifice of the rescue workers who responded to the attacks and gave their lives on behalf of New Yorkers like himself. Gil mentioned he was only able to have a sense of relief and safety after he saw U.S. fighter jets flew overhead after the towers collapsed. When the country went to war, Gil adopted soldiers, then a platoon, then organized his neighbors to adopt a 4,300 soldier brigade, their families, and wounded soldiers. So we're very fortunate that he moved here, and he's helping us here. Please welcome Gil Sample.
I would ask you to turn your program over to read what is the oath of enlistment that every member of the military takes when they join their branch of the military. And it reads, "I do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic, that I will bear true faith and allegiance to the same, and that I will obey the orders of the President of the United States and the orders of the officers appointed over me according to regulations in the Uniform Code of Military Justice. So help me God." The reason why we put that on there is to remind civilians of our obligations to support veterans, but also, as Sylvia indicated, to reflect on the fact that the rights that we have to vote, free speech, all came from the Constitution and were gained on the field of battle. So as a civilian, I feel my responsibility in supporting these veterans is to exercise the rights that they afforded me as rigorously as I can, and that means voting in every election. But it also means educating ourselves about the conflicts that we find ourselves in worldwide, and understanding that they are complex. There are difficult trade-offs. There are no easy answers, only bad answers and worse answers to how to engage. But also that we as civilians study them and also hold our elected officials responsible and accountable, that we only send our troops into harm's way when we've exhausted any and all other possibilities, but when we do send them, that they're well-led, well-trained, and well-equipped. So those are the kinds of things that I think we as civilians need to understand and honor our veterans by exercising completely. The great part of this activity for me is getting to go out and talk to veterans that we'd like to have on our panel. So I've spent last year literally hours talking to veterans beforehand, and the same thing this year. So it was a particular honor to meet Don Andresen, who is a Novato vet, has been here for a period of years, and so I've engaged him actually for several hours, I think, here in learning about his service. So let me turn first to Don, and maybe before we go into your experiences in the service, Don, you could tell us where you grew up, and then when you got out of the service, where you've lived since you've been out of the service, and then we'll work back to World War II.
All right. I was born up in Petaluma, 1926, on Kentucky Street, if you're familiar with Petaluma. And my grandfather had a chicken ranch out on I Street, and that was my home for the first 3 years. Then my folks built a house down on 8th Street, and I lived there until I graduated from high school and went into the service. After I got out of the service, I went down to Berkeley for a few years, graduated in '50, went to work for Bank of America, got transferred around a bit down south, came back up to San Francisco in '62, couldn't afford to live in San Rafael or Mill Valley, so I located in Novato. So I've been a native Novatoan since '62.
Terrific.
And I retired here in '89.
Okay. And you have 2 sons in the audience, correct?
Yeah, I'd like to introduce my 2 sons, Rick and Mark,
Okay.
the
Very
Smith
good.
brothers.
Very good. World War II started really for the United States on December 7th, 1941. Where were you, and how did you learn about it, and what was your reaction as well as that of your fellow students?
I'll never forget that day. I was out in front with my dad, and the kid down the street came over on his bicycle and told us about the Japanese attack. Of course, we went in the house, turned on the radio, and got some more news. The next day at school, Monday, they had an assembly. We all got together in the high school gym, and we heard President Roosevelt tell us that we were now at war with the Japanese Empire.
And how old were you?
I was 15 at the time.
And what was your inclination, you and your fellow
Well, we all
students?
wanted to go.
So you had to wait until how
I had
old?
to wait. Well, I did try to get into the Air Corps when I was 17, but my eyes weren't good enough. I didn't want to get drafted in June of 44, so I went down and enlisted in the Navy in May of 44, with the understanding that they wouldn't take me till my 18th birthday.
And tell us, once you got in and went through training, what that experience was about, what you were training for.
Well, first of all, we went up to boot camp up in northern Idaho, Farragut. They later called it Fever Valley, but that's a whole nother story, and we don't have that much time. But in any event, we had 8 weeks of boot camp. It was more or less a situation of learning how to take orders, cooperating with the whole squad, and just being a valued person. And when we finished boot camp, the scuttlebutt was that we were all going to the amphibs. Well, the amphibs were the fellows that got to drive the landing craft up on the beach. And that didn't sound too appetizing to me, but luckily they instead put me in the radio school. And that was also up in Farragut, Idaho. And I had 6 months of radio drumming in my ears. And the course was very thorough. When we got out of there, we could take code with our eyes shut, thinking of 10 other things, and still take the code, no problem. And that's where we were.
And when did you get your assignment for a ship to head to the Pacific?
Well, when I finished radio school, I ended up at Treasure Island and got on a troop ship. They took us out to Pearl Harbor, and I was there for a couple of weeks. And the Shields, my ship, came in, and the radio man whose place I took, poor Arnie, he was so seasick he couldn't stand a watch. So they put him on shore and took me instead. And that's how I got the Shields.
Now, on your trip out, we hear a lot about those experiences and may have seen in movies and such that it's pretty rough. You sleep in a stack of bunks, 8 high, or four high, 8 total, and then the food is terrible. But you had a slightly different experience.
Well, the funny part of that story was about a week before I shipped out, I was at a little party up in Petaluma, and I met a fellow by the name of Bill Sobranis. Some of you may remember him. He was a columnist for the Petaluma Argus-Courier for about 20 years. But in any event, Bill was in the Merchant Marine. So I'm aboard this ship headed for Pearl Harbor, standing in the chow line about 10 in the morning, hoping to get something to eat around noon if we were lucky. And who comes along the passageway but Bill Sobranis? And he says, "What are you doing?" I said, "Well, I'm standing in the chow line." He says, "You don't want that." He says, "Come with me." He takes me down to the Merchant Marine dining hall, sits me at a table with a tablecloth, knives and forks, and puts a menu in my hand. Talk about good luck. And he says, "Oh, by the way, there's an empty bunk in our stateroom. You don't want to sleep down there 5 high in that hole with those people throwing up all over the place. Come over and stay with us." So I had a tour to Hawaii that I'll never forget.
When you were assigned your ship, the Shields, and you left Pearl Harbor, what was that like? You'd heard about the attack on December 7th. You were 15 years old, and suddenly you found yourself passing through Pearl Harbor on the way to the war in the Pacific.
Things were pretty well in order, but I do remember going past the Arizona and seeing part of it sticking up out of the water, and that made quite an impression.
When you headed out to the Pacific, the mission was probably directed to the invasion of Japan. Tell us about what some of the actions were of the shields and what your duties were.
Well, we took a convoy from Pearl Harbor and ended up in the Philippines. And after we were there a month or two, I had my 19th birthday. And in the radio gang, there were 13 of us. 3 of them were older than 19. The rest of us were either 18 or 19, just a bunch of kids. But we did a lot of convoy duty. We did an awful lot of practicing, shooting, cruising with battleships, aircraft carriers, cruisers, whatever. And then in June, we went down to Borneo, and I told these fellows the other day that we threw 1,000 shells at the Japanese at a place called Mary, Borneo. But I was wrong. We only threw 920 shells at the Japs. The Australians were taking it over. It was an oil shipping point, and they wanted to cut them off. I think the Japs were sending oil out of there via submarine because they couldn't send anything on the surface. We were constantly searching for any Japanese shipping, and I don't think we ever saw anything on the surface. And we dropped ash cans a couple of times, but never got any results. We saw a few mines, we blew those up, and then along came August. I'm sitting there typing away on my typewriter, taking the code. Everything came in code, of course. And here all of a sudden I look down, and geez, it's plain language. You know, that really hit me. And I started reading what I was typing, and it told us about the atomic bomb having been dropped. I think they wanted to make very sure that the Japanese got the message. They were always listening to our code, of course. Whether they ever cracked it, I don't know, I doubt it. But this was plain language so that they got the message. And boy, that went through the ship like wildfire. We all thought that was excellent. And then 3 days later, another one. And by that time we were headed to Okinawa. And when we pulled into Okinawa, the war was over. And talk about a happy bunch of people. You can argue, you know, was the atomic bomb right or wrong? But I think if you ask anybody that was out there, it was totally right. So that's my story.
Your mission, though, didn't stop when the war was declared over. You continued on. Could you chat a little bit about your actions up in Korea as well as in mainland China?
Yeah, we were part of the last bunch of ships that went out, so they left us there, and all the old veterans got to come home. They had a big parade. Everybody got slapped on the back and so forth and so on, but we hung out for a few more months. But September 8th, right after the official end of the war, we led a convoy into Jinsan, Korea. We had a Jap pilot in there bring us in, and they brought the occupation army that was going to go into Seoul. And then from there we went down the China coast with a couple of aircraft carriers, the Boxer and the Antietam, and we did what they called a show of force. Every day the planes would take off, fly over the mainland, and let everyone know that the U.S. was still around. The communists were becoming quite a serious threat in northern China at the time. The political situation was terrible. They would send out gunboats, but our orders were just to back off, which we did. So we went down the China coast, we stopped in Tsingtao, Shanghai. Shanghai didn't have any destroyed buildings. It reminded me very much of San Francisco. We went up to the 8th floor of the Park Hotel, beautiful restaurant, had a steak dinner. I don't know what it came off of, but it was pretty good. And it was just like, but the city itself and the population, poor. People were dying every day. They'd come out and pick up the bodies, drag them off. Every night, they'd line up to go through our garbage cans. Things were terrible. We were there about a month, then we went down to Hong Kong, and that had taken quite a bit of bombing. There were ships in the harbor with the bows sticking up out of the water, and they were recovering, however. And then from Hong Kong, we came on home.
Don, as you look at your service in the Navy and you look at that period of time, what do you think is important for us? We're baby boomers for the most part, and then children of baby boomers. How should we look at that period and the service of you and your fellow shipmates and soldiers and Marines in World War II?
Well, I personally am very glad that I had the opportunity to serve, and I think I did come away with quite a good thoughts in my mind. I wanted to go to school, get a good education. I was given the GI Bill, which otherwise I could never have made. My father passed away on Christmas Day, 1945, when I was in Shanghai, China. I didn't get actually home to see my mother until February of '46, and that made quite an impression on my life course. And I think the cooperation and even the idea that we had to take orders, even though maybe we didn't agree with all of them, set a good course for me through my life.
Don, I want to thank you on behalf of everyone here, and I also want to give you my personal challenge coin, which says on it, "For outstanding service."
Thank you.
Let me turn to Dick Locke, who's an Army veteran and also a long-time Novato resident. Dick, let's start with really some background on you in terms of where you grew up, but also where you settled once you finished your Army career, and then we'll dive into the Army years.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you very much, everybody, for being here. I'm a native of Boston, Massachusetts.
Go Pats.
I attended Boston schools. I grew up as a young boy during World War II. I was born 7 months before World War II started. And I went to school at Boston College, and I pursued my law degree. While there, I was in ROTC. In June of '62, I was commissioned second lieutenant in the infantry. Went to law school for 3 years, delaying my entry on active duty, and then served almost 4.5 years in the Army, and then I was very, very lucky. My job in the Army had a natural connection to San Francisco, and as a result, I was appointed an assistant U.S. attorney for the Northern District here in San Francisco. And after 7 years in that position, I joined the law department at Pacific Gas and Electric Company. I've lived in Marin since 1970, and since 1975 I've lived in Novato. I'm married. My wife is a former naval officer. She served 6 years, partly as Treasure Island. And I have 2 daughters who went to Marin Catholic with Adrian Payne. Sure, I guess it is. I remember her as Adrian Payne in Marin Catholic, but small world that I meet one of my daughter's classmates on this dais.
Dick, what motivated you to join the Army, and then tell us about the little turn in your career from starting in the infantry?
Back in the late 50s and early 60s, there was a universal military training, the draft. We don't have it today. All the young men I knew, I went to an all-boys high school and then before going to college, they were so interested in joining, being part of the military. And when I went to BC, the ROTC there, and so that's what really motivated me. All my brothers, I have 3 brothers, they're all been in the military. Two of the other brothers, we all went to the same school, we all were in ROTC, all light in the military.
And when you joined, you started in the infantry, but then your Army career took a turn.
Yes. When I went on active duty, I'd taken a bar, but I hadn't passed yet, and I had an application to join the Judge Advocate General's Corps. But that hadn't come through, so I received my orders and went to Fort Benning, Georgia, to attend the infantry officer's basic course. And when I completed that course, when I came home, when I came home at Christmas, I thought I'd passed the bar and I was sworn in. So I was eligible then to join the JAG course, so I came back, took my leave, and then I was sent to Korea. I was going to join the 8th Army headquarters in Seoul, Korea. When I got there to the replacement battalion, they said, well, you're no longer an infantry officer, you're a JAG officer. I said, well, that's very nice. So that's what happened. I joined the Judge Advocates at the 8th Army.
And as civilians, we're obviously generally familiar about civil law, but how would you characterize the difference in practice on your JAG side versus civilian law practice?
Well, that's a tall order.
In 2 minutes or less.
Actually, military law is governed generally by the Uniform Code of Military Justice, which is, I think the current version is still the 1950 version, but it has a set of special rules for military people. You have the normal criminal provisions, murder, rape, robbery, larceny, assault, battery. But then there are a lot of very peculiar criminal actions that can take place as a result of being in the military. If you go AWOL, or if you do certain other things that are considered criminal under the military code. And then you can go before either a court-martial, or you can have what they call an Article 15 non-judicial punishment, a slap on the wrist. Then you've got summary court-martials, special court-martials, and general court-martials. So when I was in career, I was a prosecutor, I was a defense counsel, investigating officer, so you really do a real potpourri of things. But the military justice aspect was quite interesting because under the military code, if you were charged, especially for a general court-martial type charge, you automatically had a defense counsel. In the United States, until Gideon versus Wainwright, in some states you didn't have an automatic right to counsel. So it shows you the military justice system, I think, was ahead of its time and was very fair from my experience.
When you joined the Army in '65, the Vietnam War was really beginning to spin up, and additionally, resistance to the war in the United States was as well. You went to Korea, where there are similarities in terms of geography and the juxtaposition of the U.S. and its allies versus the communist North. How would you contrast your experience and what you saw in Korea versus Vietnam.
There are amazing parallels between the two instances. After World War II, South Korea was divided, North Korea communist, South Korea democratic. Vietnam, North Vietnam, South Vietnam, same thing, communist and democratic. And I look at South Korea as a major, major success for democracy because, believe it or not, South Korea is the 11th largest economy in the world. It's the 4th largest economy in Asia after India, China, and Japan. And so I view American forces being in there for the last 67 years has been a real success story. But part of the success story there was we didn't have guerrilla-type warfare against us for all these years we've been there. And so we're there to sort of protect against any incursion. South Vietnam was a real different story, and I think anybody that served there, I did, but those people who served there, it was a tough, tough slog. I think we weren't able to put in place, or see put in place the democratic institutions that were put in place in Korea.
When you and I chatted about Vietnam, you told me about your experience with respect to the My Lai investigation, and really across a number of dimensions, one of which was the changing nature of warfare. Maybe you could talk about first what My Lai was, and then what your involvement was, and perhaps some lessons and conclusions around how that occurred and what transpired.
Yeah, the My Lai massacre, I see a lot of gray hair here, so you probably know about it, because there's a lot. At the time, I was stationed at the Pentagon at the Judge Advocate's headquarters, and so I knew a lot of people that served in Vietnam. I don't think I really heard much about My Lai. My Lai basically was a situation where a group of American soldiers went into a Vietnamese village with faulty intelligence, poor leadership, a situation where many of their soldiers in the company had been killed or wounded by booby traps and stuff like that. And part of the reason was Vietnam was what we call asymmetrical warfare. The other side didn't wear uniforms. There were not lines, enemy here, U.S. forces here. The people over there that I've talked to never knew really who the enemy was. And many times our troops were in static positions that would only go out on their, to pick out pockets of resistance. In My Lai, they were sent out to this little village, set of villages. It was called Pinkville on the American maps. It was close to North Vietnam, so there were a lot of communist sympathizers there. And that's the way the operation to remove communist soldiers in Viet Cong was put forth. The problem was the communist forces, the 48th Local Force Battalion, had moved out just before the operation started. Our troops went in there expecting to find a lot of Viet Cong soldiers, and due to poor leadership, they ended up killing a lot of civilians there. And it was a very, very difficult operation. I actually have the Department of Army investigation into that with me. In another forum, I gave a talk and I had to get this information. But it was a very difficult time for our soldiers there, because just think if you're walking downtown Novato, there are 100 people that walk by you, and you're told one of those people is the enemy, might take out a gun and shoot you. I think it was very difficult for our soldiers to fight that type of war. And also, because this company that went off the rails there had had a bunch of people killed shortly before by booby traps and whatnot, they went in there with a very, very negative mindset. And as a platoon leader, William Calley, he's still alive, one of the only major participants there, he went off the rails. He was a substandard officer, quite frankly, and he directed his people to do things that they shouldn't have done.
there were obviously the crimes themselves, there were cover-ups there, but there was heroism demonstrated that day as well. Maybe you could chat about that, Dick.
Yes, my client was the commander of the helicopter pilot in My Lai. In other words, it was his pilots that went in there to give support and reconnaissance to the troops. One of the helicopter pilots, a man by the name of Hugh Thompson, noticed some bodies there. And then he also noticed some other people who had taken people and shot them. And he saw other people in a ditch over there trying to hide, civilians, women, children, old men. He put down his helicopter on the ground, which is a no-no there. You never went on the ground if you could avoid it. Placed himself between the troops and the civilians and said, if you don't turn away from these people, I'm going to turn my guns on you, which is a pretty gutsy thing to do because that could be a violation of the criminal code. And so he was able to stop it. He was able to take some of the wounded out with him and bring them to a field hospital. And there were some other people there that refused to follow those orders. One man shot himself in the foot so he'd be evacuated. So it goes to show you there was a tension between the troops of following orders and is this right? Should we do something like this? And so there was some basic humanity in a lot of people at that particular place. But what important thing is, a lot of the people that were involved in this, as they got older, it has a very heavy price on them. Thinking back, if you were a part of something like this, because it had a very negative impact on the American public, at the Pentagon, all over the place.
Dick, can you talk to us about what you took away from your service experience? And again, where there's not a draft today, only 1% of the population are in service. So most of us, as was the case with me before 9/11, had no connection with the military at all. In fact, in my case, I had to work to try to find connections there. But what I did find was that once I did, civilians were anxious to support the military. But how would you take your service, take that period, and talk to us as civilians about what we should learn from you?
Well, as you know, the draft isn't here, so it's all volunteer. So right away you have people that want to serve. And that's the most important thing. To me, when I went in the military, everybody was of like mind. They wanted to serve the country. And there were reasons for it, because the most recent wars were World War II and Korea. They were so-called good wars. And today, all the wars we're in, the actions we're in, and you related from the other speakers, as I say, they're asymmetrical. You don't know who the enemy is. And the public doesn't know what's going on many times. And so, as a soldier, it's difficult for you to go in and handle this type of arrangement where you're part of a very small part of this country that's defending its interests around the world. And I was very lucky. The attitude was entirely different when I was on active duty. And people were very, very supportive of the military, at least. But after My Lai, things got worse, and the anti-war movement, and there were major issues. When I was at the Pentagon, they had the March in the Pentagon. It was a very serious thing. Civilians were out there. We brought, I think, 2 battalions. We airlifted them up from Fort Bragg to protect the Pentagon. But today, I think we really should take our hats off to these people that go off to these foreign countries in furtherance of what our national interests are. And it's a heavy burden as far as I'm concerned.
Dick, thank you very much. And again, on behalf of the assembly here, let me thank you for your service and give me my coin. Thank you. Thank you. Now, I've had the benefit of spending actually a couple of hours with Corey and Adrian Shirk, whom I met through a friend who's a West Point grad and combat vet up in Petaluma. And I didn't know actually when I first met with Corey that I was getting a bonus that Corey's wife was also a West Point grad and an Iraq War vet. So met with the two of them, and they kindly agreed to join us today. Let me, and you've got, I think, your dad here in the audience? Very good. Thank you, sir. Adrian, you've been out of the Army for how long, and where do you and Corey live?
So I've been out of the Army now for about 10 years, and Corey and I live in San Rafael.
Okay, and it was certainly probably a bit unusual for you here in Marin County, who was a basketball star at Marin Catholic, which I read about when I Googled you, to find yourself joining the Army and going to West Point. That must have been unusual among your peers, and what motivated you to take that route?
Yeah, it was definitely unusual. I remember several people asking, "What's West Point? What do you mean? Are you enlisting? Is it the Army? Is it the Navy?" So I found myself having to explain that often, just at the beginning. I am sure that I was the first woman from Marin Catholic to go to an academy. I know several men ahead of me had gone to academies, so I was the first female to go. So that was an interesting topic, often amongst just my classmates and my peers. But I was motivated to go and attend West Point, I think because I grew up with a sense of wanting to serve. My dad was in the Coast Guard, he was SFPD, my mom's a nurse, so I lived in a family that put others first, and so I had this mindset of always giving back and thinking of selfless service as a priority. So I think I grew up just knowing that I wanted to give back in some way, so that was my motivation. But certainly I grew up as an athlete. I played sports my entire life. I played soccer and basketball, and then really found that I was a pretty good basketball player, and I thought I wanted to focus on it and maybe try it in college if I could. I was short, so I didn't know if I could make it, but some of the academies had started reaching out, Air Force, Navy, West Point, and so I started to look into opportunities there and went back to visit all three academies, but fell in love with the campus at West Point. I wanted to go where there was the most action, and I felt like the Army would provide me with that. So after a few visits and a lot of discussions with my family, decided to attend West Point.
And was that a cultural shock when you found yourself at West Point the summer before the start of the academic year? Tell us about that and how you basically adjusted to a very different environment.
Yeah, so absolutely, it was a huge shock. Really didn't know what I was getting into. I knew it would be challenging, but I think it's better to go in blind than it is to know what's coming. You just show up and accept that this is your reality now, and you just put one foot in front of the other and carry on every day. And so I remember the first night in my bed, after a horrible first day at plebe, they called us, and I was just bawling, crying, and my roommate, she was crying too. We're looking at each other just in complete shock of what had happened after saying goodbye to family and being yelled at for 12 hours. It was definitely a shock, and I think I immediately thought back to, well, what are all my friends doing at home right now? They're relaxing, having fun. But I was determined to get up the next morning and figure things out, figure out how to salute, get in line, stand at attention, learn the basics, and just carried on.
And before I ask Corey to speak, what would you say you got out of West Point? West Point is obviously, for folks on the West Coast, pretty distant and alien. I've had the opportunity to participate in a number of programs at West Point, and I must say it's so different going onto that campus up on the bluff overlooking the Hudson River. You just get so moved by the history reflected there and the importance of West Point as the Naval Academy and obviously the Air Force Academy, but particularly with West Point, give it its long history there, that you can't help but hold it in reverence. How do you look back on those 4 years and in that initial night and how you came out of West Point? What did it give you?
Yeah, I think discipline is the key to success, right? You have to be disciplined to be able to succeed at West Point. If you can't be disciplined, then everything else will fall by the wayside. So I think grit, you grow that while you're there because you have to be gritty to get through academics, physical training, military training. All of that requires just really, I think, solid mental toughness. So I think you develop that, and the reason that you develop that is because they're training you to be able to lead soldiers in combat. The ultimate goal is for you to graduate from West Point and lead America's sons and daughters. And so they want you to be the best and most prepared individual you can be. So they put you through a very, very difficult experience to test you to ensure that you're ready to go, because you can't be scared, you can't be unprepared. You have to be the best when you get out to the field. So I think knowing that you have a bigger mission upon graduation is really what keeps you focused and driven. You wake up and you have assembly or you have formation and you're looking at MacArthur or Washington. The monuments across West Point are so inspiring. Patton, those are the individuals that graduated. So you look at them in awe and inspiration, knowing what they accomplished in their careers, knowing that you're at the same place that they started. So a lot of that drove me through the challenging days of West Point.
Corey, you weren't as honest as Adrian is about your first night and the crying jags that you experienced there when we first talked. But tell us about how you found yourself at West Point and what those early days were, and then again how you graduated from West Point. What you took away from that experience.
Sure. First, you can probably tell who the boss is in our house. I just take orders on a daily basis. So I grew up in a really small town in Fork Union, Virginia. Anybody here from Fork Union? No. And both my parents were teachers, and they told me that if I wanted to go to college, I'd have to get a scholarship or go in the military. And somehow I figured out how to do both. I was lucky enough to be recruited to play football at West Point, and I had never really thought about it before the recruiter showed up at my house from the football team. And he showed me a pay scale, and I saw that you could make almost $60,000 as a captain in the Army after a couple of years. And I'm probably the first person that thought I was going to get rich in the military. So I went up to West Point on a visit, and much of what Adrian was saying and what you were saying about visiting the grounds there, I mean, it's hard to come away from there and not be inspired by the history and the graduates, and there was no way I wasn't going to take on that challenge. And it's interesting because Adrian went to West Point after 9/11. I entered West Point before 9/11. So I remember sitting around with my parents and like, well, there's no wars. We're not going to fight anybody. You can just go get a desk job and make your $60,000 one day and be rich. So showed up at West Point, and I don't know if I was sobbing the first night, but I was from a small town. I had the same friends from when I was a kid to when I graduated from high school. I was 17 years old. And I remember they make you write a letter to your parents telling them how great you're doing. And I remember just sitting back at the desk and wondering, what the hell am I doing here? But and then obviously 9/11 occurred. Never forget that day. And things certainly changed. Within, I don't remember when exactly it was, but everybody eats lunch at the same time, and they announced the first West Point casualty in Afghanistan. And that's when, things were really real then, and we were preparing for a war instead of, notional battles against Krasnovians and made up enemies. And there's no doubt West Point's difficult, probably the biggest challenge I've ever faced in my life, but Adrian was spot on. It's preparing you for combat, and some of the same feelings I had at West Point, coming home from Christmas break and going back there and it's gray and cold, was the same feeling I had coming home from R&R and going back over to Iraq. And you don't really realize it until you're in those situations. They were preparing you. They know they're pretty good at preparing you for combat and change and being able to handle situations that you're not trained for. My 5 years in the military, I didn't do a job I was trained for after training. I was just whatever they needed done. You go figure it out, and maybe you can be kind of decent at it from what you've been trained to do. So they taught us how to solve problems, and also West Point and my Army experience a lot of people think in the military, you just, you're the officer, you tell people what to do and they do it. And I would say it's the complete opposite of that. You have to earn people's respect. You have to learn how to finesse the people that you work with, show them that you care about them, and really get to know them. You don't just go tell, that'll get you in trouble as a leader. You're coming in 22, 23 years old, trying to tell people what to do. It's not going to work. And I mean, that's no different than the civilian world, where you just have to develop relationships with people and understand what makes them tick. And I think that's the best thing that West Point and the military prepared me for.
Once it was clear that you were going to deploy into a combat zone, what was your track? How did you get oriented and trained for that? And then what was the reality when you made it over to Iraq?
I was really hoping the wars would be over by the time I graduated, but they weren't. So I deployed. So I graduated from West Point. Was commissioned as a field artillery officer. Spent 6 months in Oklahoma learning how to call for and shoot artillery. I never did that in the Army. And then I joined the 1st Cavalry Division at Fort Hood, Texas. Spent 10 months training with a tank company there as their forward observer. I had a small team, and our job was to go sit on a hill and call in artillery. Again, I never did that. And then I deployed to Iraq on my 23rd birthday. We didn't really know where we were going until the last minute. So we were in Kuwait for 2 weeks. The job kept changing. Probably a week before we left, we knew we were going to East Baghdad, which was a pretty complex cultural environment there. There was a sectarian war going on inside Iraq at the time. We were in a heavy Shia neighborhood. It was basically a slum on the east side of Baghdad. The Shias are the majority, but were oppressed under Saddam. Saddam was the minority, Sunni, but in charge of Iraq before the invasion. And really, we got there and just had to figure it out. I was given a patrol of the kind of leftover soldiers, supply people, the medics, the chemical sergeant, and my little team. We had a 12-man patrol. We went out for a couple months. We could only get, you have 3 people in four trucks. We could only get 1 person out of each truck, so the 4 of us would go out and try not to get into too much trouble. And after a couple months, they realized that wasn't very smart, just having 4 people walking around Baghdad. So I did some other jobs. I was on a checkpoint on one of the more dangerous routes where I would sit in a Bradley fighting vehicle, which is a tracked, it's like a small tank where there's a ramp in the back where infantry can get out. And we would scan out there for 8 to 12 hours a night, looking for some people putting in IEDs or doing nefarious things. And then I ended up doing a civil reconstruction job for a couple months where I was drawing out cold hard cash and paying Iraqi contractors to rebuild schools and roads and pick up trash. But the experience I really appreciated during that time was the second half of the deployment. First, I should mention the Shia. We were fighting Shia militias. They were supported heavily by Iran. They had really good IEDs, rockets, and sniper rifles. They never stood and fought with us. It would be an attack, and then nothing would happen. I don't think I never saw a bad guy, if you will. So that was the fight we were having. It was very dangerous to be out on the roads where we were. I believe every single tank or Bradley in my battalion was destroyed on some level where it had to be sent to be repaired and replaced with a new one. At one point, we were swapping in and out of 1 or 2 vehicles. It would come in, refuel it, a new crew would get on and go back out. And some genius decided after we've been doing that for a while, why are we riding around in these vehicles? Let's go walk the neighborhoods. And we're all like, that's actually a pretty good idea. No one's really shooting at us. We're just getting hit with these IEDs. So about halfway through, we started walking the neighborhoods, and I would equate it to community policing, which is, I don't know if we've ever had that type of task in the military, but we started walking the streets at night in the dark. We'd take our night vision goggles quietly. The vehicles would drive away. And we started just knocking politely on people's doors. And we learned enough Arabic to go into the homes, and they would welcome us in. Hospitality is really important to that culture. And I'd go in and sit with the man of the house, and we'd drink chai tea and watch Lebanese music videos. And they'd give us cookies, and it was actually, it humanized both sides. And you learned that most people are good. They want the same things you want. I mean, it's still very dangerous, but we got to know the population. And they also, we had a tangential benefit. We started taking pictures of the males. We got to know who lived there, what weapons they might have, what their license plate was, their phone numbers, and we could go back to our sources, and they could point to the exact house and the picture that we had of the guy, and we knew exactly who the bad guy was, when before we'd cordon off a whole street and go into people's homes at night, and nobody, I mean, imagine that, some soldiers from another country coming into your home, you've got 2 young children, you're just trying to get by. In that case, we could go into the specific home, grab the guy, and they loved that. That it made a big difference. And what I took away from that, and I'm really glad I had that experience, is that most people are good. They want the same things as us. And I think soldiers, whether they, for whatever reason they joined, they all want to just do good things, do the right thing. And I didn't see anyone that was, there looking to, see combat. They wanted to take care of the people there and make lives better for them, whether you believe in the war or not. That's really what we did on the ground level. So that was the first deployment.
Yeah, Corey, before I turn it back to your boss, maybe you could chat a little bit about your second deployment, what you saw the differences between the two.
Yeah, so I didn't mention my first deployment. We were extended from 12 months to 15 months because the troop surge started about halfway through the deployment. So we went from covering almost all of East Baghdad to a very small neighborhood. And things were pretty heavy at that point. The second deployment, I deployed with my artillery battalion, and they made me the intelligence officer. I was artillery, but they made me the intelligence officer. And we were responsible for the entire city of Kirkuk up in the north. And the city of Kirkuk, or the province of Kirkuk, has 4% of the world's oil. And it's surrounded, it's basically split in thirds between the Kurds, Arab, Iraqis, and then there's the Turkmen, and they all want power in that area, and we were kind of in the middle of it all. Things had calmed down after the surge. We were still, there were still attacks and things happening, but my job was working with all the different intelligence forces, Kurdish, Iraqi, and Turkmen, and trying to develop a warrant-based system for arresting, like a legal system basically, so that they weren't just going out and rounding people up, but they were using evidence to do so. So it was a really different experience. We were not in the lead then. We were trying to put the Iraqis in the lead. And it was another interesting experience. The Kurdish region of Iraq was beautiful, green rolling hills, waterfalls. You could go out there, we could take our gear off and go to a restaurant, throw the football around. There was never a U.S. casualty in the Kurdish autonomous region up there, but then you drive 10 miles south and it's bad news. So again, I value both experiences, and again, West Point prepared me for that, where I didn't really know the job I was doing, and I just had to figure it out and use the experts around me to do the best job I could.
One thing, when I spent some time with Corey and I was talking about the brigade that I supported, we found that an infantry battalion in my brigade was in the next sector to Corey's when he was deployed in his first deployment. Adrian, back to you. You deployed roughly at the same time as Corey, and by that time you folks were dating. What was it like first to be deployed? What were your responsibilities, and were you able to maintain any sort of contact with Corey?
Sure. So I graduated West Point in 2006. Corey was 1 year ahead of me. When I went to my basic course, I was a logistics officer, trained up on logistics, supply, recovery, maintenance, a support role. I initially was planning to go to Germany. I had at West Point, you pick your branch and then you pick your base. I wanted to go to Fort Hood where he was. It wasn't even an option. So I took Germany. I figured it'd be a bargaining chip. Everybody wants to go to Germany, especially a lot of young single lieutenants. So I took Germany and figured I could maybe trade with somebody when I get to my training course. So I went and trained in Maryland first, and then did my, I think you call it your officer, your basic course, your bullet course, and I found a lieutenant who was going to Fort Hood. said, hey, I have a Germany slot. Are you interested? He's looking at me, are you serious? You're going to trade Texas for Germany? I said, yeah, I'll do it. So I traded. I got Texas, but I was still in the wrong unit. It was really important if you wanted to have a chance to make a relationship work to deploy at the same time, because what was happening is everyone would deploy for 12 months. And if you didn't deploy at the same 12 months, you potentially could possibly not see each other for years. So I said, okay, I'm at the right location. Now I need to get into the right brigade, right division. And so I called up the G1 and said, hey, I'm willing to deploy, get first cav. I'm with 4th ID right now. Is that a possibility? And they go, well, yeah, they need more lieutenants, so I'll just change your paperwork and get you to first cav. So I joke now that he's lucky I was able to do that and salvage our relationship. But he owes me. So signed to Fort Hood, 1st Cavalry Division, 3rd Brigade. He was in 2nd Brigade. Different locations. We weren't in the same spot. But what was unique about my experience is that my unit was already downrange. They were already in Iraq, and they were short a platoon leader. So I did some additional training very quickly at Fort Hood and got sent down about 6 months after they had already been in country. So imagine brand new lieutenant from West Point showing up in Iraq to lead a platoon who'd already been in combat. It's one of those things that they actually train you for, and you sit in West Point, you have your military art classes and your military history classes, and they say, okay, imagine you're showing up to your platoon for the first day. They know way more than you do. They're more experienced than you do. How do you react? So those situations had actually occurred in training before I showed up. So as Corey pointed out, the soldiers, the folks that have been there for years have way more experience than we do. They know what they're doing, so you need to let them do their job. So I showed up, obviously introduced myself, but kind of got my hands dirty right away. I wanted to learn from them, ask them questions, got to know them personally, and showed that I didn't want to come in and change everything. I just wanted to go in and help and support and figure out what was working, what wasn't working, and how I could potentially make things better. So my platoon was responsible for convoy support, logistics, maintenance, and recovery operations. Essentially that means convoys. We would lead 30 to 40 trucks from my base in the Diyala province to a larger airbase, Anaconda, to either get more fuel, to pick up people, to drop off supplies, and then come back. We were at a small outpost. It was forward operating base Warhorse. Similar to Corey, that it was small, but we were different. We were kind of out in the country, so we had a lot of indirect fire. We didn't have any buildings around us. It was just open, essentially grassland, dirt roads, very little infrastructure. We also were responsible for training the Iraqi army on maintenance of weapons and vehicles. How do you do it? How do you maintain weapons? How do you maintain your vehicles so that they make it through a certain period of time before breaking down? So very interesting and varied experience. Again, a lot of different tasks. You just had to do whatever you were asked to do and figure out a way to improve not just the situation on the ground, but ensure that your soldiers were taken care of. Many of them were exhausted and stressed by the surge. They were extended, right? They're expecting to go home to see their families, and now we're seeing 15, 16 months in country. So that added more stress and pressure in general. So a lot of our time as platoon leaders was ensuring that they were taken care of. And to me, that was the most important thing, is that they were taken care of, they were supported, they felt safe and supported, knowing that they had leadership who had their backs.
As you were describing that deployment out into areas with just grass, no buildings, et cetera, dry, the concept of Marin County didn't come through my mind when you were describing that. You get out, you've settled here. Chat a little bit about your current position, because it really bridges your experience in the military with the civilian world in a very constructive way.
Sure. So I work for Salesforce downtown San Francisco, and I work on the military program. We offer free Salesforce training to veterans, military spouses, active duty, guard, reserve, because we really believe that after you get out of the military, you can have a very successful career. You don't have to have a bachelor's degree. You don't have to have gone to college. There are technology jobs that can be had, and we want to make sure that veterans know about them. So through our platform, we're giving away thousands of dollars every month for individuals to train, get certifications, and then ultimately find jobs. And these jobs are really fantastic. They're high paying. They're with customers and partners like Deloitte, Blue Wolf, IBM, all these big companies are customers and partners of Salesforce, and we work with them to ensure that they know we have a program and a pipeline of veterans and spouses who are training and certifying and now looking for jobs. So my main focus is working with those partners and customers to get them to hire from our program. So we'll go and meet in person, talk about our program, talk about the demographic that we're serving, so they better understand some of the experiences our veterans and spouses have gone through. Their resumes may look different. Military spouses, for instance, may have huge gaps in their resumes because they've moved around so much. Veterans, whether they were mechanics or infantrymen, may not look like a good fit for a tech role, but we're trying to change the narrative and show and prove out that it is possible to not have to go to college and skill up in technology and still make it make a viable career. So that's my work right now. I love it. I'm passionate about it. I'm grateful to work at Salesforce, where the military community is very much supported. So that's kind of where I'm passionate about it. I'm very grateful for that opportunity.
Corey and Adrian, thank you so much for joining us up here. Let me turn to Christian Thwaites, who is a Novato resident, and you've heard discussions today about interactions of veterans with their families, et cetera. And one of the things that I learned when I adopted the brigade was how critical families were in supporting those people deployed. There is a term called a Blue Star parent, Blue Star dad, Blue Star mom, and Christian is a Blue Star dad. So let me turn to you, Christian, and have you tell us first what a Blue Star parent is, and then how you found yourself becoming one, particularly with an accent that I don't quite fit with Northern California.
So a Blue Star, for those of you who don't know what it is, looks like this. This is one that I've got on the back of my car. And they're meant to be displayed if you have a close family relative, in my case my son's, serving in essentially in a war zone. If you don't really fly it if they're just in another country. And then they kind of go up if you've got two sons doing it at the same time. They're meant at the same time, so I've never actually flown that one. And they came about in the Second World War, and I know there's some people here who saw plenty of them during the Second World War. And for the eagle-eyed, if you watch Saving Private Ryan, when the mother gets the news, there's three blue stars in the window, which is a fairly common way of displaying it. And if you see one with a gold star, unfortunately that means that the person was killed on active duty, and that family is obviously going through loss. So I wear the blue star as a lapel pin, and I also use this band because my son's currently on deployment.
So could you talk about how your sons got into the military, and what your reaction was as a parent?
Well, they both did OCS, which is you can join as an officer through the academies. You can do ROTC. They both went to Ivy League schools where there was no ROTC on campus for various reasons. So they showed up at Benning almost 9 years apart and had to do basic, which these guys had already gone through. And then they do OCS, and then they do something called IBOLC, which is Infantry Battalion Lead Commander, and then they both went to Ranger School, got Ranger tabbed, and then my eldest son was a platoon commander in 10th Mountain Division, and he was deployed in the spring of 2006. Now, if you wind your memories back, Iraq was very hot at that time. For the Afghan campaign had been very quick, sort of like a lightning sort of strike, and the special forces had gone in and subdued the country pretty quickly. So when I heard he'd gone to Afghanistan, that's great, that's all quiet. Well, by the time he arrived was when the things really heated up, and he was in a forward operating base, which was they called it the ranch house. It was right in the middle of nowhere, and they were getting hit nearly every day. They got awarded for 30 days right, and saw at least three or four major action sequences. And then fast forward, my other son did it. He graduated in 2013. You know, a little bit of brother envy, did exactly the same thing. It took him longer to get through Ranger School, which the other one doesn't let him know. But then he got into Ranger Regiment, and which is a pretty big deal after he served in the 82nd Airborne for a year. And he was deployed last year with the Ranger Regiment in Afghanistan, and came back, did 6 months, and did his what they call the Triple C, the captain's course, back at Benning again. Spent a lot of time at Benning, and now he's deployed again.
In the decision that your older son made to start that pattern that your second son then fell into, what was involved with that? How did he come to decide to do that, and then how did you look at it as a parent?
Well, that's an interesting question because I asked him the same thing. I think 9/11 affected him a lot. He went in as an undergrad in 1999 and graduated in 2003. It's obviously 9/11 was right in the middle of that. And he wanted to do service, and he looked at the CIA, he looked at the State Department, and he looked at the Marines, and for various reasons he chose the Army, and I think that was really good fit for him. And I just thought, hey, I'm terrifically proud of him. I thought I came from a military family. My grandfather's buried in Arlington Cemetery, so I knew roughly what he was getting into, and I thought it was a great thing. And like you said, he's then gone on to do some pretty significant stuff in the business world. Now runs a tech company down in Palo Alto.
And what was it like with each of your sons deployed? How did you communicate with them? Obviously, we heard from Don, who obviously had very limited communication during his period, and same with the Vietnam era, and then we move up to Iraq and in Afghanistan, where it's very different. And then even over the period of those wars, the communication ease has increased pretty dramatically.
Yeah, the big thing on the first one, there was a very well organized FRG, Family Readiness Group, and his company, I was on this sort of contact list basically. Most of it was email, but some of it was by phone. So we kind of knew that was talking to itself, and they had direct links into the guys who were deployed. So that was a great support network. Unfortunately, they started getting casualties almost straight away. There was a Chinook that went down in May of 2006, and 10 Mountain Division guys were killed. And I got my first taste of how this works, because you hear about the incident and then things go dark because the authorities want to communicate to the families who've had someone killed. They don't want to have them hear it indirectly. So, if my son gets the all clear and Sylvia's, and then you're left with just one, he's going to hear it indirectly, so they want to make sure that they hear it. And for that period, and this happened 3 or 4 times, because we knew the actions were not just 10th Mountain Division, but his regiment and his company, kind of know the names. And the way you're going to hear it, unfortunately, is 2 guys are going to come up, probably in a rented car, in uniform, to your driveway and give you the news. And there were times when I heard that they'd been in action, and there was one where my son's company was caught out in the open, and 3 of his guys died. One got a Silver Star. But he had to wait about 72 hours. And I used to go out running and just hope to God that I wasn't going to see some, rental car sitting in my driveway. Now with the younger one, he's 29 years old. It's Ranger Regiments, kind of Special Forces stuff. So they kind of go out for 3 days at a time for missions, which are pretty clandestine. So I don't worry quite as much about it, because I think the other ones were more, attacks and firefights, and there's a heck of a lot of imprecision and in those, as opposed to right now they're doing very precision type, laser-like type of operations. So I don't worry quite so much about that car coming up.
Christian, living here in Novato and living a life that was so fundamentally different from people around you, given the burden that your family was sharing, Were other people aware of essentially what you were going through? Did they express interest in, or were there issues with respect to whether the wars were right that your sons were in? How did you interface with folks around you?
People were pretty supportive. I mean, I think people know less about what's going on right now than they did back in 2005 or your period in 6 and 7, because it's less publicized. You know, they're doing some stuff, but they don't need the world to know what it is they're doing. So people were very supportive. I've got to say, I was running a company at the time, a $120 million revenue company, and when I was talking to my son about what they were going through, I really got a taste of what's important in this world. And if I was going into some meeting and deciding where to hold the next offsite, I'd be going, God, no, really? We're talking about this. So it kind of gave me a feeling for relative importance and things. But generally, people are very supportive.
Within the FRG context, and I don't know whether you had, say, a Facebook group or anything like that with other parents. How did you support each other?
Well, in the 2006 deployment, it was really by email, because I don't know Facebook when it started, but so that was all by, we got a group email, and that kept pretty, people would say, I heard from my husband, or and I would say, well, I heard from my son. He was, as I said, in his forward operating base, so he called in about once every 3 weeks using a satellite phone. Always wanted to talk about the weather or how his brother was doing and what was going on in the house. Never wanted to talk about what was going on. And then with the one from last year and now, it's because what they're doing is not public. He's not allowed to be on any Facebook, Twitter account. Not even meant to give his name in the context. So it's more directly with him. Now, I spoke to him last night, first time since he got landed in country. He was a bit tired, but he said he's going off on a 3-day operation. Didn't expect to hear from him for a while.
Now, your younger son was recognized recently for his actions. Do you want to tell us about that, Bronze Star?
Yes, well, he was. You can get a Bronze Star for sort of commendation and just good service, and you can get a Bronze Star for bravery. He got his for commendation and good service, and it was a small ceremony that was at Benning at the end of his triple captain's course. So that was. I think that was just sort of, I say just, but it was for sort of good, solid service over his first time in Afghanistan. Because like you guys, my eldest son went out for 12 months and then was extended to 15. And then with the Ranger Regiment, he was going out for 3, extended to 6, extended to 9. So I think he just kind of held in there, and they recognized that for him.
Last year, when Christian's son was deployed the last time, the Rotary Club provided support to him and his colleagues. So I think we'll do the same thing this time.
No, he loves those packages. Swedish fish seems to be one of the things that they like a lot.
Let's make a note of that.
That and it used to be baby wipes, because these guys were out, and never could get anywhere and get themselves clean. But it was very nice of you to do that. Thank you.
What should the audience know about your position and the service of your son? What should we take away from your collective experiences?
I think, like you said, understand what these guys are doing, because right now, there's why are these guys in Afghanistan? Obviously, just pulled these guys out of Syria, and you can see what happens when these guys go away. And it's not public, what they're doing out there, but they're doing good work. I mean, what he tells me is, they're getting bad guys. It's about as much as he'll say. Got to believe it, that these are people who would pose a threat to this country and other people around the world. So I think it's, like I said, it's sort of, understanding it, and a lot of people say, why are we still there? And it's a waste of lives, and, it's what possible interest could we have out there? But these guys are doing, what says on this oath of enlistment. They're really putting themselves out there. They believe in what they're doing, and they're doing very good work, and, the vast majority of it's sort of unrecognized. They're not looking for praise, but they just sort of at least understand why they're out there.
Christian, thank you very much. What I'm going to do is then invite questions. What I'd like to do is see what questions people may have from the audience, because this is an opportunity to engage on your side. So I'll bring the mics out to you folks.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for your service. Thank you for coming today. It's been very informative. I just wanted to ask, Dick, you touched on, near the end of the Vietnam War, the general public, there was a sense of, angst or not very supportive of the military and the returning veterans. And I think we've seen that flip on its head 180, where there's an outpouring of support. People have been able to separate the wars that they don't agree with, but they support the veterans and they know they're out there, doing, protecting our country. What do you think, and maybe Corey and Adrian can touch on this too, was the sea change or turning point or just the attitudes in our country to get from where we were in the late 70s to where we are now? Was it just time, or, because it wasn't just 9/11, the first Gulf War, everybody was, very supportive. So.
Yeah, I think that once you establish the political will of the people to engage in something like this, the Gulf War, there were strategic interests that directly affected the United States. I think then you had the attack on the United States, both at the Twin Towers, but also at the Pentagon. People sort of forget that, but I was very much interested in that. So I think also we have a volunteer army too, and people are not drafted in. I think there are a number of reasons why people can swing behind something where the soldiers are volunteers and executing national policy, as opposed to, I remember MacArthur said, never get involved in a land war in Asia. People couldn't understand why we were 9,000 miles away in Vietnam. They had the draft too, and we had 541,000 soldiers and sailors and Marines there. So there was a real impact on a lot of families. So I think the impact today is on a very small group of families, like Christians. And the people that are carrying the heavy lumber there are doing a real yeoman's job, because it's a very, very difficult type of war or conflict to engage in.
Sure, yeah. I don't know if I can add much to that, but I think it is important that we always remember that people join the military for a wide range of reasons, and it is important that we continue to realize that and understand that that's, we're not politicians. We sign up for a job. We have a sense of duty. We do the job, whether we believe in it or not. It's what we signed up to do, and that's all. It's nothing more than that. So I hope we never forget that.
Could I just ask? Could I ask all the veterans in the audience to please stand up and be recognized? Are there any veterans who'd like to make some comments? Because we'd love to hear from veterans out in the audience. So you're, okay.
I'm curious my name is Bob Geis, and I served in the Army. I was drafted. I'm sort of wondering, is there any other people here that were drafted in the Army? That's very enlightening to me, because I thought this was mainly for people that served in the military as a career occupation, or were in for more than what I was for 2 years. Anyway, thank you so much.
My name is Anders Winther. I represent the LGBTQ veterans of the North Bay. I served in the Navy, the Air Force, and with the Marines for 2 years while in the Navy over the course of 13 years. For years, when people would say thank you for your service, I'd be flummoxed. You know, I didn't want to say you're welcome because, you know, it's not always a great experience. But one day in Safeway, I came across a World War II veteran in his wheelchair, and I thanked him for his service. And his response to me was, "Thank you for your kind words." And that became my response over the years. But I'm curious, for the veterans here, when people say, "Thank you for your service," what do you say? Or anybody here? There's somebody over there in the corner.
Yeah, I usually say, you know, it was an honor, it was a privilege, and it really was. I think we were lucky to have the opportunity to lead soldiers, and so I am so grateful for that. So that's usually my response is it was an honor and a privilege that not everybody's given. So we took it very seriously, we still do, and that's the way I reply.
Thank you.
I was going to say, most of my friends served in the military, so for, I think most of us, it's probably not, we don't see it as a big deal. So it is kind of awkward sometimes. So I just try to kind of play it off and just say thank you, but I don't feel like I've done anything special.
Don, I'd like to hear your answer.
How do I respond?
Right.
Occasionally, if I've got my hat on, somebody might come by and say, "Thank you for your service." And all I can say is, "Thank you." My dad was Army, World War I.
Other questions out there? Sir?
Yeah, my name is Don Violin. In response to that question, I would say, I just say the same thing. Thank you and for recognizing it. I joined the Army when I was 14 years of age. Believe it or not, I served 9 years. I served during the occupation of Germany, and then I subsequently served in Korea. I'm currently with the VFW looking for members, but I strongly approve of what is going on here, is this recognition of veterans on an annual basis, and the pictures on the Grand Avenue. We are unique, and thank you so much to the council here for putting that on. Thank you.
I'd like to hear from some more vets here. Here we go.
I'll just make a quick comment on that. When somebody says, "Thank you for your," my name's Alan Test, I served in the Navy. When somebody says, "Thank you for my service," your service, my initial response to myself is, "Did you serve?" Because I am not a fan of the all-volunteer military.
Who else here? Harry, any? Yeah.
Harry Thomas, drafted Vietnam vet. I find when people thank me for my service, I find it a little awkward. We did our job. We did what our parents taught us. And we don't want thanks. We want you to serve us by voting and taking care of your community. I think that's it. I do find it awkward sometimes. I say thank you, but it's often difficult for me, at least, to hear that so many years later.
There was actually a New York Times article a few years ago, and the title of it was "Don't Thank Me for My Service." And when I saw it, I was shocked. But then I read the article. It was written by an Army veteran, and his comment was, understand what my service is, understand what I went through, understand the experiences. and then engage, as Harry and others have said, engage politically, because essentially that's what my service was for. So that was a message that had a profound impact on me, and it's something that really is a message out from this panel as to what we owe them. I gave a speech a few years ago entitled "What We Owe Our Military," and so much of it was supporting them through exercising our rights under the Constitution. But I think also recognizing that when veterans come out of their service, we owe them our support and engagement, and to embrace them back into the communities and make sure that they're gainfully employed. And in my responsibility as a CASA, I feel my number one priority is to educate civilians about what these folks in the military go through, and then what we can do to embrace them. And with my experience in Connecticut, I would say the vast majority of the people in my town didn't agree with going into Iraq to begin with, but it made no difference. Once I made personal connections between our citizens in our groups with that brigade, it was all in, because everybody recognized the importance that to supporting the soldiers engaged in the fight and their families, and then separately we needed to exercise our political rights. So what we found was, once we made a connection with people in combat, then everybody was supportive. So let me see, are there any other questions, any other comments, particularly from vets right over here? Oh, okay, yeah, Ernie.
I was answering the question about how veterans might respond to the message from the public, individuals in the public. Thank you for your service. I know there was a lot of sort of a pushback feeling among some veterans. Oh, they weren't there. They don't know how it was. You know, this is just a quick little polite thing to say. But from my heart, I say thank you for acknowledging our sacrifice. And thank you for letting us come back into our communities to the extent that we're able. Some of us bearing wounds that are not visible, some of us being very obviously bearing injuries from our service, and some of us unscathed. You know, I'd like to have that kind of luck myself, but more power to you. So basically my message in return for the thanks is thank you for the acknowledgement.
Thank you. Thanks, Gil. My name is Ernie Bergman. I'm the president of the Vietnam Vets of America chapter here in Marin County. We don't get really active. There's probably 12,000, as Dick said. There's probably between 12 and 14,000 veterans here in Marin County, and most of them are Vietnam veterans. But one of the things we do in talking about giving back, for the last 15 years, my chapter's been going into all the high schools in Marin County and talking to the juniors, because in your junior year, that's when you're studying world history or U.S. history. And when the book gets around to Vietnam, we go in there and kind of, give them a little idea about what the war is all about. What we've discovered is that the kids are learning about military service and war, et cetera, from movies and computer games and comic books and all that. And I know that Dick and Gil know this. When I first started doing this, I would go into a classroom, and they're all 17, 16 years old. And they go, "Are you a veteran?" I go, "Yeah." "Wow, how many people did you kill? What kind of drugs did you do?" And that's the attitude the kids have. So what we're doing is we're trying to give them a reality of what it's like being in the military, what it's like being a veteran, and what it's like to be at war. Because most of the people I know are very anti-war. If you've ever been in war, experienced it, you can't be for it. But also, we're trying to give them a realistic idea about what it is to serve. And we think we're getting through them. We've been doing it for 15 years now. And I only hope that when I was 17, I was a lost soul. And I couldn't wait to get in. I had a couple of football scholarships. I could have gone to college, but my parents were driving me nuts. And I had to get out of the house, and I was bored to death. And I only hope that some of the impact that we do as Vietnam veterans can at least give those guys a better understanding of what it's like. So when they're 18, 19, and trying to make decisions for the rest of their life, they do it on good information. Thank you.
one of the things I do in my CASA role is to help recruiters gain better access at schools. And the biggest challenge that I have to overcome is misconceptions that parents have and teachers have and administrators have about what military service is. And one of the things that we've worked to do in these panels is to just show how members of the military have reintegrated into civilian society and become very productive members of society. So that's an important element that I think is valuable for both parents and teachers. The other dynamic is that there is such a range of different disciplines, skills that members of the military learn when they go in. The Army, I think, is its own worst enemy when it projects commercials of people jumping out of helicopters into firefights when over 80% of the MOSs in the Army are non-combat related there, and fundamentally the Army is engaged in a variety of different types of support activities around the world, and we actually showed that at Fleet Week with the Humanitarian Assistance Village and disaster support exhibits that we had down there. So it's something that I think is important to get out to educators, because they have a problem, as I learned when I went in to meet with the Marin County Superintendent of Schools. There are plenty of people who may not find a 4-year college career to be right for them, and yet they wander in terms of finding the right track, and yet the military across all of the branches presents tremendous opportunities for skills, for discipline, leadership, et cetera, and then people are able to come out into very capable, effective civilian jobs. So something to take away from this. I think we've got a question. Oh, Bill.
Hi, I'm Bill Walker. I'm a graduate of the Coast Guard Academy, and I got the biggest kick when I heard Corey and Adrian say what their reactions to the first day was. I went to the Coast Guard Academy because I found out that I could get a free education, and I've always wanted to be an engineer. And so I graduated from there, and I got an engineering degree. Yeah. And we always joke about that because we say, yeah, it was $70,000 free education crammed down your throat a nickel at a time. Yeah, but not to joke about that. My service in the Coast Guard for 24 years, I never once thought of the word service. I don't know, just never occurred to me. But that's what we were doing, and we continue to do it. And then after I retired, a few years after that, a good friend of mine, my former pastor, happens to be sitting right over here, invited me to a meeting which was life-changing at that stage of my life. He invited me to a Rotary Club meeting. The Rotary motto is service above self. And the other service organizations that we participate with, they do the same thing. It's a selfless offering of our time, our treasures, our energies, and it's aimed at serving humanity in whatever role we're faced with. So I just wanted to say that I'm proud to have served in the Coast Guard, and I'm equally proud that I'm a Rotarian, and that motto is more than just a couple of words.
Thank you, Bill.
Hi, I'm John David. I had the privilege of watching Adrian play at Marin Catholic for quite a few years. My question was, oftentimes we hear of women in the military and their experiences not always being positive for a variety of reasons. When you went in country, you not only already assigned to a unit that had been there a while, You're also a female officer. What were those experiences like?
Yeah, it was, I think, again, West Point prepared me for that. I think it was a 15% ratio of women at West Point and to men. So I was surrounded by my peers who were mostly male, became very used to that environment. So I knew it would be very similar downrange in Iraq. There were some females in my company, but probably 85% were male. So I think going in knowing that I had to earn respect was really important. I automatically had the odds stacked against me, just being a smaller woman, right, coming into the war zone. So I think the majority of the men I served with were fantastic. They were supportive. They were advocates. They had my back, right? But I think there's always going to be a few that don't think that women should serve or don't think they should be alongside them. For me, I just kept doing what I always did, was one foot in front of the other, right? Gaining respect, building relationships, but showing that I was competent and that I was a leader who would also get down and do the work on the ground with the soldiers. I didn't feel like I was above anybody else, and I proved that pretty quickly by asking questions and getting involved and engaged. But for me, coming from West Point, I was used to being surrounded by men. If somebody said something inappropriate, I'd stop them right there and correct them and take it up to, with their leader or with our company commander. So I didn't let those things slide, and I think that was really important. I didn't ignore it. So I right away kind of showed up saying, we're going to respect each other. I know this is the role that I'm in, and this is the role that you're in, and this is how we're going to work together. So coming in knowing that I just had to establish myself as a firm but kind leader was really, really important.
I think, Dick, you had a comment.
No, in listening to some of the questions and some of the comments from the audience, I'm struck by something. I think it's the motto of the Academy, I may be wrong, and duty, honor, and country. And I think more young people need to focus on that type of message from us, duty, honor, and country. Because I think we no longer have universal military training, so a lot of people never hear those words, never see it in action. And that's part of the loss of an all-volunteer Army.
Any other comments? Okay, thank you all for coming. Let's give a big hand to the panelists here today.